All right, welcome everybody on recording. I was a little late. You've missed the first 4 minutes, but it's okay. All right, so now keep your thoughts in mind. In a moment, we're going to go to texts from Jewish tradition. But first, thought I would give a quiz to the members of the group. We invite you to answer by writing it in the chats, or you can wave your hand and maybe we'll call on you. The question is, what four countries account for, together, these four countries account for the vast majority of executions that occur in the world? So as you're aware, there are dozens and dozens, even hundreds of countries that span the globe. Yet if you look at capital punishment, putting people to death, a government executing people, there are four countries combined, where you take the totals of those four countries, and it forms the overwhelming majority of all than the other couple hundred countries. So the question I ask you is, what four countries in the world account together for the preponderance of government executions today? And I'm going to open up chats to see who's going to be sharing some. All right, so Janet Solomon has said US, Iran, and North Korea and got 2 of the 4. Howard Kilman said US, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Iran and got 3 of the 4. Lynn Sachs says China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and USA. Lynn Sachs also got 3 out of 4. You guys are really, really good. So obviously this is a loaded question because it's a fascinating and interesting one. The answer is the 4 countries are the United States, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and China. The United States, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and China. And I bring that up to you because it's strange bedfellows. The United States is a, liberal democratic country in terms of our political system. And all of our natural allies and kin, countries, we are alone on this list. There's, none of the European counterparts or, and in fact, our natural allies look to us as very odd in this way, whether that be Europe or Canada or Australia or so forth. And indeed, we are, again, a lot like Iran, Saudi Arabia, and China in that we execute people for crimes in a large number. So that's just a little quiz at start the day, a little backdrop. We'll get back to America later, but we are going to now jump into Jewish tradition. And we're going to come to our text here. Boom, boom, boom. And let's get to, of course, before we start our first text that we're going to be studying, are words of Torah. Before we get there, though, we need to say the blessing for Torah study. Everyone, we're doing a mitzvah by studying Torah today, so good for you. Let's say the blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctifies us with the commandments and commands us to engage in words of Torah. Friends, after yesterday, I hope you find these sessions fun. I hope you find them stimulating. This blessing reminds us that it's also sacred. It is holy to study words of Torah and the teachings of our rabbis. And today's topic is included. One of the things that I very much emphasize with the confirmation class through many of our classes, saying it explicitly, and especially at the culmination with the confirmation ceremony, is that Judaism gives us thousands of years of wisdom and guidance from God. And during the most difficult questions of our lives, when answers are not easy, when we're really on a precipice, we don't know what to do, that's when it's most especially helpful to turn to the sages of our tradition, to turn to the wisdom of our Bible and find guidance. And this is an issue. I will confess right out the bat, um, it is not, I'm not an absolutist when it comes to the death penalty, and you will come to see this certainly at the end of today's program. I am quite torn and conflicted, and so it's in times like this that I feel very grateful to have our Jewish heritage, that I don't stand alone in the world trying to wrestle with, whether or not I would advise someone to have an abortion, or, things that are like real conundrums. I can lean on Jewish tradition and get support and guidance. And this is such a case on the death penalty. So let's start by looking at the Torah. We're going to look right away. We're going to look at 4 passages of Torah. We're going to start with the book of Genesis, chapter 9, verse 6. Lynn, I'm going to mute you there. Okay. Whoever sheds the blood of a human, by a human, shall his blood be shed. For in God's image did God make the human. There is so much in that one statement. I want us to read it again and carefully. Whoever sheds the blood of a human, by a human shall his blood be shed. For in God's image did God make the human. Let's start with the first 2 phrases. Whoever sheds blood, so if someone kills someone, phrase 2, by a human shall his blood be shed. So it states explicitly that that person needs to die. And not just needs to die, but it is incumbent upon humanity to execute it. Not just hope for God's justice, like, oh, if you commit murder, you won't live long, or you'll die, or you'll get a disease or something. No, you don't pray for it, you do it. Yet if someone commits murder, it is the society's obligation to put that person to death. And then the last phrase speaks to the sanctity of human life. I want to get to that more in just a minute, but it says you have to put a murderer to death because murder is so onerous. I mean, murder is so despicable, is so evil, because when one commits murder, one is killing a human being, and a human being is created in the image of God. A human being is sacred and special. I'm going to postpone any questions until after the second text, because I feel these 2 are really one and the same. We're going to jump forward now to the book of Numbers, here in Numbers 35. This is a very special commandment in the Torah, and I'll explain why in a moment. You may not accept a ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of a capital crime. He must be put to death. You may not accept a ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of a capital crime. He must be put to death. I said this is a special law in the Torah. The reason is because it's unique to the Torah among the Torah's brethren. We like to think of the Torah as absolutely special, the singular gift given from God on Sinai. But if you step back and look in a dispassionate, scholarly way, as the Bible would be studied in universities and so forth, you see that actually our Torah is in keeping with many other ancient Near Eastern legal codes. In fact, the Torah is in whole sections of the Torah, most of the commandments of the Torah can be found verbatim in other legal codes, such as the Hittite laws, and most famously, the codes of Hammurabi. What we find is that most of the commandments of the Torah are not only not unique to the Jews, they are not, or the Israelites, they didn't even originate with us. There are other legal codes that are older, and the Torah borrows from them wholesale. Enormous swaths of the Torah are just like the codes of Hammurabi, most especially. But what is very interesting is to see where the Torah differs. If 95% or more of the Torah can be found in the codes of Hammurabi in terms of the laws, those few cases where we differ come to show how the Israelites were unique and how our people, the Jewish people of really brought something new to the world. This is such a case. In all the other legal codes in the ancient Near East, there is a way for murderers to buy their way out of capital punishment. So, in other legal codes would say that a murder should be put to death, but if the clan that had the murderer in their clan is able to negotiate with that other clan or family unit a ransom agreement, then that's fine. As long as they've worked it out between them, all's good. If the victim clan, says we don't want to accept a ransom, then the murderer is put to death. But a ransom, negotiated ransom, is possible. It is the Torah alone and singularly that says no. You can pay a ransom if you kill someone's ox. You can pay a ransom if you burn down someone's house. But if you kill another person, the victim's family cannot negotiate a ransom because it is like in modern legal sense, we would say it's a crime against the state. As if like in American law, if someone commit murder and the family said, oh no, we don't want to press charges, the family doesn't have that right because it's a law against the state. That idea really is originated from us, from our Torah, that human life is so precious, we're created in the image of God, that no ransom can be paid. You must put a murderer to death. And that, my friends, is one of the great ironies of the Torah, one of the great ironies of Jewish tradition, in that Judaism, and let me rephrase that, Torah Judaism, or Israelite religion of the Torah so adamantly regards human life as precious and sacred that it demands the death of a murderer. I'll restate that. The irony of the Torah is that because the Torah values human life more than any other legal code of its time, it demands the death of a murderer. All right, with that, I'm going to stop the screen share for just a moment. I'm going to open up the floor to questions, and all right, Run here is right from the chats. How did the phrase capital crime get into the Torah? Thought it was a legal lingo. Well, the Torah is filled with legal lingo. There is tort law. There is all kinds of different law. So much law is found in the Torah, and it just depends on the translation. The translation sometimes will use more legal language or sometimes not, but the English will sometimes mirror. It just depends on the translator. If you have a question, you're welcome to raise your hand. I'm looking around. Ellen, please unmute yourself. Ellen Zippen.
I have a question about a contradiction. Yesterday, when we spoke about Cain, God made an exception immediately, practically, compared to the one you've got up today, certainly in Genesis, where he does not allow Cain to be killed, even though he has slain his brother.
An excellent point. Cain, of course, is a very special case because Cain didn't understand murder until after it happened. And so God's what's it called? God's compassion and mercy for Cain is really understandable. Cain was such a childish innocent. Murder had never been done before, and so he was surprised by it. And so he is given a little bit of a pass there.
Thank you.
If there's not any other questions, all right, there'll be more opportunities. Let's get back to our text. We have two more texts from the Torah, and then we'll open up the floor again. Screen share. Boom. Leviticus. Actually, I'm going to invite someone to be a reader. Phyllis, you are, would you be willing? Phyllis Dreyfus, you have to unmute yourself.
Got it. Okay. And to the Israelite people speak thus: anyone who blasphemes, whatever, excuse my pronunciation, God shall bear the guilt. If that person also pronounces the name Lord, he shall be put to death. The whole community shall stone him, stranger or citizen, if he has thus pronounced the name. He shall be put to death. If anyone kills any human being, he shall be put to death. One who kills a beast shall make restitution for it, life for life. If anyone maims his fellow, as he has done so, shall it be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The injury he inflicted on another shall be inflicted on him. One who kills a beast shall make restitution for it, but one who kills a human being shall be put to death. You shall have one standard for stranger and citizen alike, for I, the Lord, am your God.
All right.
Wow.
Thank you, Phyllis. So from this passage, we get to see a lot about the Torah's regard vis-a-vis capital punishment and values. First of all, several different crimes are elucidated here that merit the death penalty. As it turns out, there are a couple dozen different violations that the Torah says you must be put to death for. So we've already mentioned murder, but here also blasphemy. Others include lighting a fire on Shabbat, dishonoring mother and father. There are a number of different crimes, like I said, a couple dozen different crimes that merit the death penalty in the Torah. Also here, and I want you to notice, it also gives us a clue as to how the death penalty was executed, the very means. So, for instance, it wasn't an electric chair, and it wasn't a lynching, and it wasn't a firing squad, which may be American-style executions, but the execution style is described here, namely stoning. There were other types of capital punishment means, but stoning is the one par excellence and most common form of capital punishment as described in the Torah. And here it makes clear that restitution can be made for other things, but not for murder. And then finally, I want us to pay special attention to the very last line. You shall have one standard for the stranger and citizen alike, for I, the Lord, am your God. And here I feel is where America violates the Torah. America puts a lot of people to death. And strangely, that's actually really in keeping with the Torah's teaching, which is an enthusiastic supporter of capital punishment. But where I feel America violates the Torah is in this statement. You shall have one standard for the stranger and citizen alike. Namely, that the laws of capital punishment shall be applied evenly across the populace. And as we're going to see in about 20 minutes, or not even, in about 10 minutes, America does not apply capital punishment evenly, not based on race or ethnicity. But we'll hold off on that for just a moment. I want us to look at one last Torah text, and then I'll look at the chats and hands that might be raised. Deuteronomy, chapter 17. And I'm going to invite another reader. Do one of the Kleins want to read? I'm trying to just scroll through and see who's up here. Doug Pop, would you be willing to read?
I'd rather not. I'm not a good reader. Thank you, though.
Not a good reader. Okay, that's fine. Mark Peltz, would you like to read? You have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes. So Mark is going to read from Deuteronomy. And in what Mark reads, look for the Torah is going to give another reason, a moral reason in favor of capital punishment. Mark, if you could please read.
A person shall put to death only on the testimony of 2 or more witnesses. He must not put to death on the testimony of a single witness. Let the hands of the witnesses be the first against him to put him to death, and the hands of the rest of the people thereafter. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst.
Fantastic. So you get a few things in this passage. By the way, I could have chosen 50 passages from the Torah that talk about the death penalty in some way. I tried to pick 4 that really reveal something about the core of the Torah's values. And this has 2 very important, I would say, 3 very important aspects to it. First of all, witnesses. It doesn't let you just do capital punishment willy-nilly. It gives some real strong requirements that you must have 2 witnesses. You can't just have someone accuse someone of something and that person be put to death. You must have 2 witnesses, and that's going to become very important later when we get to the rabbinic period. So just hold on to that. And then let the hands of the witnesses be the first against them and put them to death is fascinating. It might make someone more reluctant to be a witness or to come forward because they know that they're not just going to send someone to their death, but they're going to have to take part in it. There were a number of comments in the chats that spoke about stoning as a brutal and very painful and not quick method of execution. It is. Got to agree. One of the people called it cruel and unusual. Yes, it is. But stoning, I would argue, is in some ways much more moral than all of the other methods of execution, because whether you use an electric chair or a firing squad, it's one thing to have an executioner go and execute someone elsewhere and leaving society sanitized of that ugliness. What stoning does is it puts the people at the execution and has them all collectively be executioners. Now, I don't know if that's good or bad. Well, it's good and bad. What's bad about it is it enhances the brutality of human beings. Hold on one moment. I'm getting a call. I don't think it would be from any of you, so I'm going to ignore it. Stoning, what was I going to say? It enhances the brutality of society because it makes everybody take part in killing. But on the other hand, you would think it would also make people take a step back from calling for the blood of a murderer when they actually see what that means. It might be easier for someone in America to say, like, yeah, that person ought to get the electric chair, when you know you're not going to see that person, shake and, in the time of their death. It's sanitized and removed. So stoning, I think, is more than just archaic. It's actually a very interesting cultural collective activity. So I'm going to stop the screen share for a moment. Because we're going to come to the end of our Torah text for now. And I wanted to ask, before we start talking about whether or not we ought to do capital punishment, which is our next subject, before we get to the rabbis, what I want to talk about are these Torah passages specifically. So if there's any questions or comments on Torah passage, please go ahead and raise your hand.
Yes.
Or just unmute yourself and ask your question.
I don't know.
Are you muted?
All right. Okay, then. We're going to go to the next subject. So, Mark, I'm going to mute you again. So now, what happens next? In our confirmation class, I try not to be a frontal speaker, or even just, here's a text, let's talk about it together. Because 14, 15, and 16-year-olds, some of them, they eat it up. Like you hand them a text and they want to dig right in. Some of them, not so much. So in confirmation class, I try to make things more interactive, try to have movement, try to have the kids break into groups and do stuff. And pedagogically, what I do in the capital punishment section is I break the kids into 5 groups and give them, each of those 5 groups, information on something of interest for capital punishment. They study it, they become the little experts on that little subject, and then they present it to the rest of the class. So let's look at these 5 subjects that the kids will study, and then and know that they're going to be studying these separately and presenting them in the class. In this setting, that doesn't really work so much. First of all, there's too many of us. We have about 75 people right here. That's too many. We can't do presentations. I'm sorry. I'm glad that you're all here, but it's too many to do, presentations. So we will have breakout after this section. So let's go back to screen share here. And here comes first breakout group. Oh, this writing's a little bit smaller. Let me see if I can make it any bigger. Yeah, that came out a little bit bigger. Okay, so the first group is going to talk about race. And what you're going to find in the chart on the right is what I feel is among the most damning things about American capital punishment. That if you look at the last, 300 cases where murderers were put to death, were executed, where the crime was interracial, either a black person murdering a white person or a white person murdering a black person, only 20 of the 300 was a white defendant and a black victim, whereas 287 was a black defendant and a white victim. And it goes, I'll just read out loud because I'm worried that jurors in Washington state are 3 times more likely to recommend a death sentence for a black defendant than a white defendant in a similar case from a 2014 study. Similarly, in Louisiana, this interesting from California. A study in California found that those convicted of killing whites were more than 3 times as likely to be sentenced to death as those convicted of killing blacks, and more than 4 times as likely as those convicting Latinos. Similarly found in North Carolina, and in 1998, this is an older study that was done on all of the states. 49 of the 50 states showed significant disparities on whether or not the death penalty was sought in cases based on race of victim and race of defendant. So group 1 would present on the disparity of race in how district attorneys seek capital punishment and how juries convict on capital punishment. It is uneven based on race. And as I mentioned earlier, that is a direct violation of the Torah that says that capital punishment, you shall have one law for stranger and citizen alike, meaning it should be applied evenly across the population. And in the case of America today, it is not. Group 2 talks about financial considerations. Whatever, I'll get to that later. Some people argue that, why should we pay for murderers to, be in prison for, life in prison because it's so expensive. In fact, it is much, much, much more expensive to put someone to death because in the United States, capital crimes require so much more legal workings. There are appeal after appeal after appeal, and it ends up that it is so much more expensive to try capital cases and appeal them because the attorneys and the judges are very expensive per hour, but also the other court employees. And so we find in Oklahoma, it's 3.2 times more expensive to put someone to death than it would be, well, no, let me go by dollars here. A study in California revealed that the cost of death penalty in the state has been over $4 billion since 1978. Study considered pre-trial and trial costs, costs of automatic appeals, state habeas corpus petitions, costs of federal habeas corpus appeals, and the costs of incarceration on death row. Let's look at Florida. I'm right here. It's a little small. I'll just read it word for word. This is a little bit older, from the year 2000, from the Palm Beach Post. Enforcing the death penalty costs Florida $51 million a year above what it would have cost to punish all first-degree murderers with life in prison without parole. That's based on 44 executions Florida has carried out since 1976. That amounts to a cost of $24 million for each execution. That, again, is just comparing the cost of putting someone to death, mostly from legal costs, than it would be to put someone in prison for life. I'm not saying that it should just be a dollars and cents judgment. I'm just saying is that some people say that, we should put people to death and not pay for them to be in jail. I'm just saying in our current legal system, it is actually significantly much more expensive to put people to death than it is to put them in jail for life. Group 3, deterrence. Here I regret, when in our previous Torah passage, in fact, I'm just going to go to it real quick. I should have emphasized it here. Deuteronomy says you need to put people to death, thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. That is a very powerful statement. It can mean one of two things. One is that murder and murderers are a special evil that must be removed from the community, or it means that by having capital punishment, you will deter murder. I'm not sure what Deuteronomy means here, but it seems to suggest deterrence, that if you do capital punishment, you will prevent murder. It's interesting to note that that may in fact have been true in ancient Israel. It is not true in America. So in America, the reason why deterrence doesn't work in America is because the death of murderers happens so many years later. Studies have shown that because of that delay, that when people are considering committing murder or not, they do not, even though they might be aware of capital punishment, it doesn't register because it's not immediate. It's way off in the future. And among the experts in criminology are actually against capital punishment in that it's not effective as a deterrent. And here I'm just going to read this one study here from 2009. In 2009, they did a study of all presidents or former presidents of the country's academic criminology societies. So these are the people who are in charge of studying crime, and 88% of them rejected the notion that death penalty acts as a deterrent. Now, why do the experts reject it? Because not only their own personal observance, but because study after study has shown that capital punishment is not a deterrent. It doesn't mean that the Torah was wrong. The Torah may have been right in its time, but in the way we do capital punishment today, it actually doesn't work as a deterrent. Group 4 looked on the issue of putting to death people who might be innocent. And this is just one chart that shows by state all of the people who were sentenced to death who were later exonerated. Since 1973, that's 155 people who were sentenced to death, but later, whether it's DNA evidence comes about because they're better, or it was discovered that witnesses were pressured, or someone else confesses the crime, or for whatever reason, 155 people who were sentenced to death were later found to be innocent. It's interesting to note that which state is the highest on all of these. It might be too small, but I don't know if you can see, but it's Florida. 27 people have been sentenced to death in Florida who were later shown to be innocent. The next state highest is Illinois. Interestingly, Illinois was the epicenter of what was called that Innocence Project that started I believe with a professor at Northwestern, or was it University of Chicago? I think it was Northwestern. And Illinois found so many people on death row were innocent that Illinois the governor started a moratorium on capital punishment that has persisted. And finally, our last group, I see that there's some chats, but I'm not going to look at them yet because I'm on a roll. We're going to have a break in just a moment. The last group of kids was given not facts, but a philosophical assignment. They were to reflect on this philosophical issue. Do we have a moral obligation to punish some murderers with death? So this thinking is, even if it costs more, even if we're imperfect in our execution of it, I didn't mean to make that pun, even if we're imperfect in the way we do capital punishment, even if, all of these things, do we nonetheless have a moral obligation to put murderers to death? Is it, that murder is so anathema to our values that must we put people to death? And then finally, the last question, or the opposite question, is do we have the right to? Do we have the moral right to take another life? Even if we want to put someone to death and feel that they deserve death, do we have the right to execute someone, not in self-defense? They are incarcerated. They're not a threat to anyone. Do we have the right to take someone's life? So this group brought up the philosophical issues. So in a moment, we are going to break into our smaller groups. But real quick, I'm going to take a look and invite if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question. I'm going to take a quick look at the chats. So just give me that moment. Yes, Lowell pointed out that the underlying racism that exists in the U.S. is shown by our current situation. Today's course was planned a month ago, a month and a half ago. It could not obviously be more timely than what we're seeing right now regarding the inherent racism that exists in America.
This is Ellen, and one thing I've been thinking about while you've been speaking is that we usually think of God as the one who gives life and takes it away. So I think it's interesting that in the Torah, God conveys that right also to humans in some circumstances.
Boy, I love it. I hope you will talk about that in the breakout session. Because, who are we to play God and take someone's life? Ellen points out, well, God said we should in the Torah. So that's very interesting. Look, you know where I'm going with this. I gave away the end at the beginning. The rabbis are going to go a different way with this and be against the death penalty. And so Judaism ultimately will be against the death penalty. But the Torah is not. Our Bible practice is not. In fact, we're unusually adamant in demanding death for murder. It's like the hallmark of the Torah, or one of them, compared to its neighbors. What we're going to do now, by the way, Rini, love your comment. I am going to address that at the end. So I'm not ignoring you, Rini.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but we're not going to do questions now.
That's it.
What we're going to do now is we're going to go into breakout groups. It's not going to be the same breakout groups as yesterday, but I have just thrown so much information at you. Torah passages, some of them are rather striking. I've also thrown all of these breakout group topics at you. It's a lot to process. You've all been really good during this frontal presentation of listening. Now it's your chance to really talk about it. So we're going to go to breakout groups. When I go to breakout groups, first I'm going to unmute you, and then when you're in your breakout group, it's going to come up and it's going to say, join a breakout group, go ahead and hit OK. Otherwise, you'll be stuck in no breakout group and you'll be all alone in cyberspace. And that's no place to be. You don't want that. So you're all unmuted. Hi, everybody.
Okay.
And breakout
God.
room.
Where does it say okay?
I'm going to do 7. That's a very Jewish number. 7. Group in your group. Open all rooms.
To join?
Fine.
So go ahead and hit OK.
We hit okay.
Right there, join. What's room 2? I
Or
don't
hit
know.
join. Yeah, you got assigned to room 2, Diane. Hit join.
Wait, there.
All righty. Bobby Bernstein or Alan, do you guys need any help joining a group or you don't want to be in a group? Jeff Ingalls, do you need any help? Charla, are you doing okay? Sandy Zemmel, you doing all right? Charla? All right, I'm going to join the groups.
Damn.
I was able to get on your computer. I don't know, maybe.
I guess we're in a breakout room.
Hey, Howie,
Hey,
I'm
I had
Judy.
another meeting, so I just turned on to see if we're still on.
Yeah, my computer was giving me trouble, so I had to sign in to Fred's computer, and I haven't been on for the last few minutes. So it looks like maybe you and I are the only ones in this room.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, Sandy Z might be, and Renee.
Yeah. Looks like, Joff,
Can you see me now?
I can see you, yeah.
Yeah, Renee was up here, but
Yeah,
she's
so
gone.
came there too, but
And Jeff Ingalls, but they're muted. They need to unmute themselves.
Hi, Corey.
I know I missed the whole meeting, so
Oh, did you just get on?
I just got on because I had another meeting to go to at 1 o'clock, so. And that took preference, but I was curious to find out what the rabbi said.
Oh, it's been real interesting.
Yeah? On the
Yeah.
death penalty?
Yeah, he talked first a little bit about ancient Jews and then Jews in the last 2,000 years.
You know, the other two people I have here are muted, you're right.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with them. And I don't know what question the rabbi asked or how he divided the group since Sandy's muted too. Where's Carol?
She's in talking on the phone right now.
Oh, you should tell her to come say hello. Well, so you just got on?
Yeah.
So basically, he said that the death penalty in ancient Israel was basically, yeah, if you killed somebody, you were put to death. And then another part of it, you had to have 2 or 3 witnesses. And then if you were deemed guilty, then the witnesses were the first to throw the stones. And what else did he say? I don't know. And then he talked about the injustices in the United States about blacks and white, and how also the death penalty in the United States has not been a deterrent, because it usually takes so long with so many appeals for anybody to be put to death that they don't think of it as a deterrent.
Yeah.
And that's about all I can remember.
Well,
How are your kids in Israel doing?
they're good, knock wood.
Yeah, the virus isn't too bad where they're at.
No, they seem to be okay. My son was working at home, but now he's actually going to the office once in a while. So I think they're really, releasing
Yeah.
some of the things.
My son is in Seattle and they are not opening anything yet.
Not yet, no.
So he's been working from home for months when he can, with 3 kids. Not easy. Little kids.
Right. But Carol video phones with my grandson who just had a baby. So
nice.
So we've been talking with my great grandsons. We don't talk to him, but we talk to his parents, and we see him anyway. So it's very nice.
Not all of your children are in Israel, are they?
No, I have a daughter here in Sarasota.
Really? I didn't know that. Oh,
Yeah.
yes, I did, because you have a granddaughter that I remember a couple of years ago, she had a bat mitzvah.
Right. She got a mitzvah from Temple Emanu-El.
So has she been confirmed already now?
Yes, it was, I don't know, last year or 2 years ago.
Yeah. So is she out of high school now?
Yes, she's in college this year.
Wow.
She graduated last year, so she had a graduation
decent-
party and everything.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Those poor kids this year, it wasn't fair.
Unbelievable, right? So, but I mean, my daughter, she works at Bank of America, and she's been going in every day.
Oh, really?
She wears a mask, but
Yeah.
still, you wonder.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people are not going to the bank. Thank God.
Well, you know what? Most of the banks require you to have an appointment now to go inside at all.
Yeah.
I know Wells Fargo's like that. You can't go in without an appointment. You can go to the windows.
Yeah, well, I don't know how she does it, but they let people into the bank, but they got to stay within the 6-foot distance.
Yeah, like the grocery stores.
Yeah, but I don't know how they do that. Talking to some of the investors and stuff like that. They got to sit in their little office,
Yeah.
Anyway, not good. She's okay. And
I wonder how much, that is good. I'm wondering how much longer this breakout room stuff is going to last.
Because
It doesn't say.
yeah, no, it doesn't.
Oh, well.
Okay.
I wish I could discuss the issues better with you, but.
Yeah. Oh, there we go.
What? Ah, there's Susan. Hey, Susan.
Oh, are you talking to me?
We
Hey,
were.
Hey.
I don't know how this happened. Wait a minute.
Are we in a group now?
We're in the big room, but
we
not
have-
everybody has joined us.
We lost you for a while, Rabbi. I think it was my computer. When I went back, Howie and I were the only ones in one of the rooms.
Yeah, a late joiner.
Oh, we had broken into breakout rooms for discussion.
Yeah, you froze right before that happened, and I had to go get on a different computer.
Oh, no. Well, I'm glad we're together now.
Me too.
So you missed the chatting. By the way, I could chat all day about your mangoes.
Oh,
Oh, my God.
There we go.
I'll bring you more. Does Elaine eat them?
No, me and Eden.
Oh, okay. I didn't bring you
Here.
Well, that was very interesting.
Hello, Kleins.
Made the covenant.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hey,
You're
Klein,
on
wake up.
screen. Hello, Kleins.
Hey, how are you?
Hi.
Hey, Rabbi, can I ask you, Rabbi, can I ask you a question about yesterday? Can I?
Davey,
Hi, Nancy.
actually, I think we got to get back to today's topic because just about everyone's back in our big group now.
Okay.
Rabbi, there's a little light on my screen that says recording. Is that something you're doing? Are you recording this? Oh,
Yes,
okay.
yes.
So watch what you say.
Can we get a share? Rabbi, why don't you mute everybody?
I'm about to. I'm just waiting until everybody comes in. All righty. So let's, I'm going to mute everyone there. All right. So let me see. I'll spotlight us again here. So I hope your individual discussions were fruitful and interesting, and you had a chance to process all of the information that's been presented, and also share some of your own opinions and convictions on this. I got to visit, I think, all but one of the breakout rooms, so that was nice to see everybody. Let's now look at the rabbinic teaching. So here's what's interesting. Our rabbis will come about in a time, with the destruction, the rabbis, the rabbinic movement started even while the temple still stood, but really flourished with the destruction of the temple and the end of the Kohanim, the priestly cult, running things. And it really, our tradition became following the ways of the rabbis, who emphasized the law, who emphasized the teachings, and the observance of Judaism wherever you might be. The rabbis will be adamantly opposed to the death penalty. They found it abhorrent. But what's interesting about this is how they reconciled that with the fact that the Torah, which they love and they regard as the guide of their life and the Word of God, says the opposite. So what do you do when the Torah says this, but you feel this is the right path? And what the rabbis do whenever this happens is they come up with twists and turns and legal wranglings to reinterpret the words to make it say what they want it to say. But one thing the rabbis will never do and never did is say the Torah was wrong. To say the Torah says this, but that's wrong. And I believe in 612 of the 613 commandments, but not that one, even though that's obviously how they felt. But they wouldn't do that. So instead, they had to say, well, we're going to make up some ridiculous legalistic explanation of why we can't follow that law, even though it's ideal and perfect, we can't follow it. And that's what we're about to see. We're going to see the rabbis go a 180 in a different direction. So let's do a screen share so that we can see those texts. Oh, by the way, I'm going to do a quick screen share. We're going to interrupt this for a commercial. I said earlier I wanted to announce at the beginning the upcoming classes. So today ends this week's program on the death penalty. Next week we have two. We're going to be doing abortion, Jewish views, on abortion, and which is not only very deep but fascinating. Next, and then we're going to do the ethics of self-driving cars. And what that has to do is self-driving cars are programmed in a particular case that if you're on a bridge and a pedestrian walks in front of you, you can either swerve off and kill the driver or hit the pedestrian and kill the pedestrian. Computer programmers are designing the car to make that decision. What's the right decision? And we're going to look at Jewish values to help guide us in automation. If we're going to teach machines to make moral decisions, what should those moral decisions be? So those are the next two. And then the final week, interfaith marriage and why aren't we Christians? Note that this week we did Monday and Tuesday. The following weeks will be Mondays and Wednesdays. We couldn't do Wednesday this week because Wednesday's lunch with the rabbi at noon. So we're going to stop that share, and I'm going to do a new screen share of our texts. All righty. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger. Can I make this bigger? Look at that. I can make it bigger. All right. So here is the fundamental, it's attribution. There we go. The Mishnah. The Mishnah is from the year 200. The Mishnah records what is centuries of what's called oral law. The Torah was the written law, but then you also had the teachings that were passed from generation to generations that weren't written down. But in the year 200, after two devastating, unsuccessful revolts against Rome, the Jewish people were very vulnerable, and we were starting to spread out and be dispersed, both forcibly by the Romans and also by our own immigration. And the rabbis began to fear that the oral law would get forgotten or dissolute, or there wouldn't be conformity. So they started to write down the oral law. So the traditions of our people for centuries were written down first in the Mishnah, which is about this big. It's about like the size of a Bible, a little bit bigger. And then, so the Mishnah is just a long list of laws and opinions from the rabbis. And then that gets expanded on and over the next 4 centuries to become the Talmud. So the Mishnah, the rabbis will take a verse of the Mishnah, and then they'll write in a whole bunch of discussion about that verse, and then they'll get to the next verse. And the Talmud is the size of an encyclopedia. It's, well, you can't see my, I need to back up. The Talmud is this big. It's the size of an encyclopedia. It's much bigger than the Mishnah. And that, the Mishnah and the Talmud really dictate. But by the Mishnahs from the year 200, the Talmud was from around the 4th to 6th centuries. By the time the Talmud was done, you basically have Judaism. The Judaism that we follow is the practices of the Mishnah and the Talmud. So some of the things that we consider fundamental Judaism in terms of our ritual practice and our values are actually from there. So Shabbat, it says you should observe the Sabbath and keep it holy in the Torah, but it doesn't tell you how. So it's the Mishnah and the Talmud that say light candles, have a challah, drink wine, say this blessing when you drink the wine and when you have the challah and when you light the candles. That's the, so the Torah says observe the Sabbath. The Mishnah and the Talmud really elaborate on how to observe the Sabbath. Who can work on the Sabbath and who can't, what work can be done and what work can't be done. That's all in the Talmud. The Torah just says do no work. So that's Judaism's development in a nutshell. Let's see how that works here with the issue of capital punishment. So the Mishnah in the year 200 says this: the Sanhedrin, that's like our ancient people's Supreme Court. It was made up of the leading 70 rabbis. The Sanhedrin that puts to death one person in 7 years is termed tyrannical. All right? So that is the overall opinion of the rabbis of the Sanhedrin who collectively wrote the Mishnah. That's the majority statement, that a Sanhedrin that puts someone to death 1 in 7 years is tyrannical. It's like they're brutish. The thought of executing someone once every 7 years is horrific. It shouldn't be done that often, according to the majority of the rabbis. Notice that they don't say that you should never do capital punishment, but rather it has to be exceedingly rare. Then along comes Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and I want you to pay special attention to his words, which we'll see later. We'll see why later. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says 1 person in 70 years. And then Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva say, if we had been in the Sanhedrin, no one would have ever been put to death. It's interesting to point. It was the majority of the Sanhedrin that said 1 in 7 years is too much. Tarfon and Akiva are important. Rabbi Tarfon, I would say, is in the top 20 most important rabbis who've ever lived in terms of the importance of his teachings. And Rabbi Akiva is number 1, and probably number 1, certainly no less than top 3, with Hillel and Maimonides, and maybe Rashi, in terms of the most important rabbis who've ever lived. So the fact that they said that they would never put anyone to death, is not just, oh, that's one guy's opinion. It's Tarfon and Akiva's opinion. It's like saying some basketball players say you should shoot it this way. The majority say you should shoot a basketball this way. Michael Jordan says you shoot a basketball this way. Well, it's one guy's opinion, but it's Michael Jordan's, all right? So Rabbi Akiva says never. Then, because we're Jews, and you wonder, why are Jews so opinionated? Why are we okay with disagreement? Why are we given the freedom and latitude to believe what we want? Why isn't the rabbi telling me what I ought to believe about the death penalty? It's because Jews won't stand for uniform belief or opinion. And here you can see why. It comes right from the Mishnah. The majority opinion is said, then a single opinion, and a single opinion that disputes the others. Rabbi Simeon ben Gamliel, also in the top 20 most important rabbis of all time, said they, referring to Tarfon and Akiva, had they, who didn't want to put anyone to death, he said they would have thereby increased the shedders of blood in Israel. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel believed in deterrence and felt that if you don't put anyone to death, it'll lead to more murder. That, my friends, is the Mishnah's statement on the death penalty, which is not to refute the Torah and say it's wrong, but to say, well, the Torah says that, and there might be some case where you would put someone to death, but you shouldn't do it regularly. It should be remarkably exceptional, if at all. But how can you, though, not put people to death when the Torah says to put people to death? And here's where the rabbis go, wah, 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 wah. So the Mechilta says that the Sanhedrin used to decide capital cases next to the temple. These were very important cases, so they would do it up on the mount in front of everybody. But since there's no temple, no capital punishment. They say, oh, we would do capital punishment, but we don't have a temple anymore, so therefore we can't do it anymore. More often, though, what the rabbis would say is they would disqualify the witnesses. Because the Torah says, what do you need to put someone to death?
2 witnesses.
2 witnesses. And what the rabbis would do is make the requirement on the witnesses to be so ridiculous that no witness could satisfactorily incriminate someone enough to put them to death. Namely, they said this: in order for a witness' testimony to be valid, they have to be able to testify that the person committed the murder, knowingly committed murder, so it wasn't, accidental, or that they were of sound mind. They were knowingly committing murder. And 3, they knew that the punishment for murder was death. Now, you could ask the rabbis, as people did, well, how can a witness know that the person knew that the death was, that they're committing murder would commit capital punishment? And the rabbi in that case said, well, if the witness needs to hear the murderer say, I am about to kill this person, I know it's murder, and I know I'll be executed for it, stabbing. That's never happened. And then the rabbis didn't put people to death. So how do we know that they didn't put people to death? Maimonides. So we talked about Maimonides, and we used Maimonides in the same way yesterday. These first 2 passages are theoretical works of law talking about what ought to be. What Maimonides does in a great way is he's like, it's like you go to a lecture that's esoteric and you don't understand what's going on, and you get to sit next to your smartest friend who sort of whispers to you and explains what's going on and who these people are and what really is. He's like an insider giving you, that's the way he worked in his day, but best of all, it's the way he works for us so many centuries later. So these rabbis were writing, I said that the year 200 was the Mishnah. Mechilta will come around the 4th to 5th century. Now we get to Maimonides. Maimonides, we're now talking Maimonides is 1,000 years ago, born in early life in Spain, but lived most of his adult life because he was basically kicked out of Spain in some of its tumult. And lived most of his life in Alexandria, which is, today part of Egypt and, along the Mediterranean coast. Maimonides says there is established procedure, one which we follow in practice, whereby a person who is guilty of a crime for which the punishment is death is instead excommunicated and whipped. And we've never given an opportunity for pardon. The reason is that today we no longer carry out the death penalty. Now, why Maimonides is so helpful here to us when we're trying to understand history, not value, is that the previous rabbis are all making polemical assertions. You shouldn't commit it, you shouldn't do it, it's tyrannical to do it, or another one saying, oh, if you don't do it, you'll increase murder or whatever. But Maimonides isn't trying to make a point. He's not trying to convince you. He's just telling you what is. And what is, in the 11th and 12th century, what is that Jews are not doing capital punishment. The rabbis won. I mean, the view of the Mishnah won out. And Jews don't do capital punishment. And you find throughout medieval period, Jews did not do capital punishment. The only exception, the only cases where you find a Jewish court putting someone to death is when the Gentile authorities forced them to. The baron, the prince, the king, whoever was in charge, gave Jews autonomy. But if there was a case that they wanted done, they would force the Jewish courts to put someone to death. Other than that, it didn't happen for 2,000 years. So now we're going to get to the modern texts. What do rabbis today say? I'm going to just quickly, if you don't mind, I'm going to just quickly go to the chats just in case someone, if you have someone had to leave, Someone asked about stoning for homosexuality. I know homosexuality is called an abomination. I don't think is it punishable by death? I don't recall that. We could look it up easily. It's Leviticus, I want to say 18, so you can look it up. And I'm going to skip Nina's question because that's my grand conclusion. So don't look at the chats, anyone. It's going to reveal the conclusion. All right, let's get to our last page here because we're coming to the end of our time. Modern texts. So Reform rabbis. Where's the Reform rabbis come? The Central Conference of American Rabbis. That's, my governing, my association of rabbis, and Rabbi Shefrin, all Rabbi Lane, all the Reform rabbis. We oppose capital punishment under all circumstances. So the Reform rabbis are, at least the vast majority, enough to have near unanimity. We don't really take votes unless they're nearly unanimous. We're clever that way. Otherwise, we don't take a vote. So, there's a lot of pre-polling done. The next, the Rabbinic Assembly, which is interesting. Whereas the Torah teaches that all human beings are created in God's image, whereas Jewish tradition upholds the sanctity of life, whereas both in concept and practice, rabbinic leaders in many different historical periods have found capital punishment repugnant. They're referencing the text we just read, whereas no evidence has been marshaled to indicate with any persuasiveness that capital punishment serves as a deterrent to crime, whereas legal study has shown that as many as 300 people in this century have been wrongly convicted of capital crime. It's like they took this class. The rabbis of the conservative rabbinical assembly. It's like, what? Wait, what, are they here right now? I don't even see them. What's going on? Therefore, be it resolved that the Rabbinic Assembly, again, that's conservative rabbis, oppose the adoption of death penalty laws and urge their abolition in states that have already adopted them.
Wow.
So,
you said
capital
25
punishment. I wanted to say one thing about that, and then we'll conclude with one more point. So 2 points to conclude with. One is this, and this I do tell our confirmation kids. Capital punishment, whether or not, the fact that America executes so many people is the will of the people.
Wow.
It's not the government or those DAs or those judges. Well, of course it is, especially the DAs. The biggest determinant is not jurors or judges, it's district attorneys who either seek death penalty or don't seek death penalty. Whatever. They're all politicians. They do the will of the people. And if you look at US history over the last couple hundred years, the opinion of the American people vis-a-vis capital punishment has swung like a pendulum. There have been times when we were in favor of it and we did it, and there are times when the majority of Americans were opposed to death penalty and we didn't do it. We are at a period of time right now. The pendulum, by the way, swings slowly. It's history. We're in the point right now where the death penalty is decreasing in popularity. In fact, it is breaking the threshold where more Americans are opposed to the death penalty. It's swinging against. Earlier in the 20th century, you look in the 1920s and the 30s and the 40s, you did not see governments putting people to death. There may have been lynchings of mobs, but you didn't see executions. It was in the 50s and the 60s that it grew great popularity, so that in the 70s, it became regular practice through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s until now. But the pendulum is swinging in the other direction. And so I would tell you that this is not a theoretical issue. It is a voting issue. You don't have to wait till you're on a jury for this issue to matter. How we express our opinions will determine how society responds to these cases. And then finally, when I teach this to the confirmands, I conclude by telling the story of Adolf Eichmann. Our kids get very intense Holocaust education in our religious school. They go to the Holocaust Museum. They hear every year from a survivor, and then they're dedicate, I believe, 6th grade, half a year to Holocaust studies. Our school does an excellent job, but they don't necessarily know the story of Eichmann because it's a post-Holocaust story. It's really a story of Israel and the Jewish people. So I tell them about how Nazis escaped and lived in Argentina and Brazil. I tell them about how early Mossad captured Eichmann, clandestinely drugged him, put him on a private El Al plane under disguise, said he was a sick crew member, and got him out, and then tried him publicly with dozens of Holocaust survivors telling their story on the world stage. And then Israel put him to death. And I want to draw our attention back to the Mishnah, because what is the Mishnah? It's an 1800-year-old text. But I wanted to look at Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Do you see it there?
Yeah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah.
I'm literally getting goosebumps right now, and I already knew what I was going to show you. Israel does not put people to death. Not a single citizen of Israel, and there are murders and heinous crimes in Israel. Not a single Palestinian terrorist has been executed, sentenced to death. I mean, in wartime, there's killings, there's assassinations, but I'm talking about someone in custody being sentenced to death and then executed. No Palestinian, no Jew committing treason, no Jew committing murder. No one in Israel has been put to death except for one Adolf Eichmann. And it speaks to, perhaps, the necessity of capital punishment in some cases, the special evil, or maybe he was just symbolic, he alone. It's not like Israel didn't have the opportunity to execute or kill other Nazis had they wanted to. They sought him symbolically and they executed him. And not everyone in Israel, supported it, but by and large it is. But look at Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. How long has Israel been around? About 70 years.
Yeah.
Whoops, hit the wrong button. All right, friends, that is the end of our program. I'm going to invite anyone who wants to stick around and ask their questions. You're welcome to, but it's been an hour and a half, and I want to excuse those who need to go. This Wednesday at noon, tomorrow at noon is Lunch with the Rabbi. We've got services this Friday night at 7:15. We'll be back at the Glickman household. And let's see, because Rabbi Shefrin is on vacation, and then after him, I'll be on vacation, so you're going to get interspersed rabbis in the weeks ahead. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation on the death penalty. I'm going to unmute everybody. You're welcome to stick around for questions or or comments and so forth. And here comes the unmute all.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Question, Rabbi.
That's
Where
what
was Eichmann executed?
some of you is in our head.
Well,
Right into our head, Rabbi. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Brenda.
Thank you.
Rini, you've got two devices on, so you're causing your own feedback loop.
Okay, my question is, where was Eichmann executed, not in Israel.
All right. The Eichmann, I believe, was executed in Israel. And there was a fascinating story that just came out about it. The guy who executed him never spoke of it. And his son found records of it. The guy who built the executing device or the chair or whatever it was, and dismantled it and destroyed it. I want to see if I could go find it. But the guy who was tasked to kill him found it repugnant and wanted it not glorified. So St. Pete had the whole Eichmann exhibit about 2 years ago, and it was amazing. We tried to get everybody to go to it. We were trying to tell everybody about it. But what they didn't have was anything from his execution because they got rid of it all. But I wish I could find the story because it didn't come out until recently when the son found his father's writings about it, or he'd heard about it from his dad and he waited for his dad to die before he spoke about it. But it was very interesting. I mean, there was so much that was fascinating about the Eichmann trial. The guards that stood around him were all Sephardic because the Israelis didn't want any Ashkenazic guards to kill him. So they thought the Sephardic Jews might be more detached because none of their family were killed by Eichmann. Anyway, there are so many things about the Eichmann's execution. Of course, his capture is
alone
fascinating, but I'm talking specifically his execution. Joanne Hybe.
Hi. First of all, it was fantastic today.
Thank you, Anne.
But I'm going back to the three things you need to execute someone. You need knowledge that it's going to cause your death. You need to be told that what you're doing is wrong. And the third one was
that you know that you'll get killed for it.
You'll know that you'll killed for it. Let's go to George Floyd. The policeman knows what the penalty for murder is. It's part of his training. He was being told all during the time he was killing him that he was doing it. And I can guarantee you can get people from that mob, or some of us who saw it on tape, that will say that we saw him do it.
Mm-hmm.
Would he not be, in the old biblical time, perfect candidate for death penalty?
The truth is, the rabbis did that as a legal excuse to not do execution. They still punished people for murder. And so even if you don't feel that you're not against the death, even if you're against the death penalty, no one is saying murderers should not be punished. Even Maimonides said we don't do it, but we excommunicate them without parole, which means they get banished from the community. That means they don't ever get to see their family, their friends, their livelihood, everything. They're expelled, and they're also flogged. So they're beaten to a pulp and kicked out of existence, basically, never to be seen again. So it's not like Maimonides is saying just let them off. He's saying don't kill them. But what I was describing was basically a legal fiction. They would find a way not to put that police
but I'm saying that
to death.
This would be the case of the person who fit that legal fiction. That everything that they asked for
I
was
guess
in there.
you're right.
Yeah, you're right. That's right.
You're right.
Yeah, that's right. He fits the case.
Except that he never said that he knew he would be killed because probably he expected that a white would not convict him.
Yeah.
But a policeman would know that.
An excellent point.
But that's not a practice that is held by that particular police force.
Susan has her hand up. Susan, you want to say something?
Thank you. Hi. Great job. I also have it in my chat. So you mentioned what the Reform Judaism where their stance is. So what is the Orthodox and the Hasidic and the evangelical? Why is it okay to murder but not?
I'm sorry, you're right. I didn't address it specifically.
Okay.
No Jews, no Jewish groups endorse the death penalty because the Mishnah, the Talmud, all the great rabbinic commentators, the medieval times that are authoritative to Orthodox Jews are all against the death penalty.
All against
But they're not going to say a death penalty is, impossible. It's always got to be possible because the Torah says so, but they don't, in practice, don't do it. No Jews have done it freely for the last 2,000 years, except the execution of Eichmann. It's the one exception in 2,000 years where a free Jewish court of any denomination has ever sought the death of a person, as punishment for a crime.
And you'll address the evangelical and abortion viewpoint next week?
Now, when you say evangelical, are you talking about Christians or are you talking about Jews?
Christians.
Christian evangelicals. Maybe. It's not my area of expertise or interest, so I probably won't address it much at all.
I just find it very ironic that they're all for it, except in one circumstance. That was all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Rabbi. Hi, Rabbi.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording. One moment.
No, he's just. No, it says it's recording.
I'm going to pause it.